Hello, everyone. Now you will hear a story where the sweet promises of a wife ended in broken trust and disrespect. I'm waiting for your thoughts here in the comments. And now let's listen to this story together.
Dylan and Sarah were the kind of couple people whispered about behind their backs. They're so different. How do they even make it work? He was the steady one, the type who mapped out his life like a 5-year business plan, complete with bullet points and contingency clauses. She was a whirlwind of energy, the kind of woman who could turn a grocery run into a spontaneous dance party. To Dylan, her zest for life was the spark that would keep their marriage vibrant. To Sarah, his reliability was a comforting anchor, a stark contrast to the reckless chaos of her old party girlfriends. For a while, it seemed like a match made in quirky rom-com heaven. They tied the knot in a small ceremony, Dylan in a crisp suit, Sarah in a dress that somehow managed to glitter even in the dim church light, and everyone assumed opposites really did attract. But time, as it often does, had other plans. Before the wedding, Sarah's idea of a good time wasn't just the occasional dinner with friends. No, she lived for the pulse of nightclubs, the kind where the bass thumped so hard it rattled your ribs. She'd dance until dawn, a cocktail in one hand, laughter spilling out of her like glitter. Flirting was her second language and freedom was her religion. Dylan, predictably, wasn't a fan. After one particularly late night that ended with Sarah stumbling home at 3 a.m., reeking of tequila and someone else's cologne, he'd put his foot down. "This isn't how a married woman acts," he'd said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The conversation stretched into hours, Sarah rolling her eyes so hard they nearly got stuck, Dylan folding his arms like a disappointed schoolteacher. Finally, she threw up her hands. Fine, I'm an adult now. Party's over. Happy?" And for a while, it seemed like she meant it. Weekends turned into cozy movie nights on the couch, the popcorn bowl balanced precariously between them. They experimented with recipes, Dylan's meticulous lasagna versus Sarah's let's just wing it chili, and took drives to the countryside, where Sarah would tease him about his insistence on packing a spare tire and a roadside emergency kit. "You're such a Boy Scout," she'd laugh, and he'd smirk, secretly pleased. Dylan started to believe their marriage was settling into something solid, something real. Then his job made adjustments to the course of events. A promotion came with a catch: frequent business trips. 2 or 3 days a week, Dylan found himself in bland hotel rooms in cities he barely remembered the names of, surrounded by beige walls, lukewarm coffee, and the hum of late-night TV. He'd call Sarah from the road, picturing her curled up on their sofa with a cup of tea, maybe binge-watching some ridiculous reality show she'd never admit to loving. At least, that's what he thought she was doing. The first cracks were subtle, like hairline fractures in a windshield, small enough to ignore until they started to spread. A phone call she'd let ring out when he was in the room, only to snatch it up and mutter, "Wrong number," with a too bright smile. A crumpled receipt from a downtown bar, tucked in the kitchen trash under a banana peel, even though she'd sworn she'd stayed in all night. Once, he caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume on her scarf, something sharp and musky, nothing like the floral stuff she usually wore. "Dry cleaner must have mixed it up," she'd said with a shrug, but her eyes darted away too fast. Dylan wasn't a fool. He'd always prided himself on his attention to detail. It's what made him good at his job, good at life. But pride didn't stop the gnawing in his gut, the quiet suspicion that coiled tighter with every oddity. He'd lie awake in those hotel rooms, staring at the popcorn ceiling, replaying their last conversation in his head. Was her laugh a little too forced? Did she sound distracted? He wanted proof, something concrete to confront her with. But all he had were crumbs. Crumbs and a sinking feeling that the life he'd so carefully planned was slipping out of his hands. One night, as he packed for yet another trip, he paused by the bedroom door. Sarah was sprawled on the bed, scrolling through her phone, humming off-key to some pop song. She looked up, flashed him a grin. "Don't forget your spare socks, Mr. Prepared for Anything." He forced a chuckle. "Wouldn't dream of it." But as he zipped up his suitcase, his eyes lingered on her phone. The screen glowed just out of sight, and for a split second he wondered what or who was on the other end. Doubt is a slow poison. It creeps in quietly, seeping into your thoughts until it's all you can taste, bitter, relentless, and impossible to ignore. For Dylan, it had become a nightly companion, whispering in his ear as he lay awake in yet another sterile hotel room. Was Sarah lying? Was he paranoid? The questions gnawed at him, fraying his nerves until he couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. Cold, hard, undeniable answers. So he did what any rational, sleep-deprived man with a knack for planning might do. He bought a hidden camera. It was a tiny thing with a sleek black casing and a promise of discreet surveillance printed on the box. He ordered it online, had it shipped to his office to avoid questions, and spent an evening tinkering with the setup. The next morning before his latest business trip, he tucked it. She'd never notice it there. He didn't tell her, of course. What was the point? If she was innocent, she'd never know. If she wasn't, well, he'd deal with that when the time came. 3 days later, holed up in a hotel in Cleveland with spotty Wi-Fi and a view of a parking lot, Dylan logged into the camera's app. His heart thudded against his ribs as the feed buffered, the little loading circle mocking him with every sluggish spin. Finally, the screen flickered to life, and there she was, Sarah, strutting across their living room like it was a catwalk. She looked different. Her hair was swept up in a messy, but not really bun, every strand artfully placed. Her lips were painted a bold red, and she wore a short black dress that hugged her frame, the kind of outfit you didn't throw on for a night of Netflix and leftovers. Dylan's stomach twisted. She was pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing wildly as she talked. "I just don't get it," she huffed, pausing to check her reflection in the hallway mirror. She dabbed at her lipstick, smacking her lips with a dramatic flourish. "Who hate clubbing are controlling. My husband is a little dictator. Okay, sure, I'm married, so what? Does that mean I'm supposed to just shrivel up and die in these four walls while he's off gallivanting who knows where?" Dylan's jaw clenched so tight he swore he heard a molar crack. Gallivanting? He was in Cleveland, for crying out loud, eating overcooked room service chicken and drafting PowerPoint slides until midnight. Hardly the life of a jet-setting playboy. Sarah laughed, a sharp, carefree sound that cut through the grainy audio like a knife. "He's so old-fashioned, you know. Sometimes I feel like I'm ancient if I'm not out having fun. Forget him. Clubs are my life." She spun on her heel, grabbed her purse from the couch, and flounced out the door, the lock clicking shut behind her. The camera kept rolling, capturing the empty room in all its silent betrayal. Dylan snapped his laptop shut. His hands were shaking, not just from anger, but from the raw, jagged sting of being right. He'd wanted proof, and there it was, served up in high definition with a side of sarcasm. Sarah hadn't just broken her promise. She'd tap-danced all over it in stilettos. He sat there, staring at the wall, the hum of the hotel air conditioner filling the void where his thoughts should have been. Part of him wanted to call her right then, demand an explanation. Another part wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Instead, he poured himself a cup of tea and took a long, slow sip. The camera didn't lie, but it didn't solve anything either. It just left him with a bigger question. What the hell was he going to do about it? Dylan was stuck. He had the evidence now, crystal clear and undeniable, but knowing was one thing. Figuring out what to do with it was a whole different beast. Talk to her? The thought made his stomach churn. He could already hear her deflecting with that eye roll of hers. Divorce? Too drastic? Too final? He needed time to think. A screaming match? Tempting, sure, but he wasn't the type to lose his cool over a kitchen table showdown. So, he did what any man teetering on the edge of sanity might. He decided to see it for himself. This time he faked a business trip. Told Sarah he'd be gone for 2 days, packed his suitcase with the usual precision, spare socks and all, and even called her from the car to sell the lie. "Heading to the airport now," he said, voice steady as ever. "Love you." She'd chirped back, "Love you too. Safe travels." And he'd almost believed her. Almost. Instead of boarding a plane, Dylan parked 2 streets over from their house, swapped his button-down for a hoodie, and waited. Sure enough, within an hour, Sarah emerged. She was a vision. Hair teased into perfect waves, a slinky red dress that screamed, "Look at me," and heels so high they could have doubled as weapons. Before she left, she dialed him, right on schedule, playing the dutiful wife. "Hey, honey," she cooed, her voice dripping with sugar as she paced the living room. "Yeah, just chilling at home, watching some movies. Did a little work earlier, miss you already." Dylan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. "Movies, huh?" He watched her hang up, grab her keys, and slide into her car. 15 minutes later, she was on the move, and so was he. Tailing her wasn't hard. Sarah drove like she lived, fast, flashy, and oblivious to anyone else. He kept a safe distance, blending into the evening traffic, his heart pounding a rhythm that matched the hum of the engine. She pulled up to Pulse, the city's hottest nightclub, all neon lights and thumping bass. Dylan parked across the street, tugged his hood lower, and slipped inside after her, sticking to the shadows like some low-budget private eye. At first it looked innocent enough. Well, as innocent as a night of clubbing could be when you just lied to your husband about staying home. Sarah met up with her usual crew, a gaggle of women in sparkly tops, sipping neon cocktails and shrieking with laughter. They danced in a loose circle, hips swaying, drinks sloshing. Dylan lingered by the bar, nursing a soda he didn't want, his eyes locked on her through the crowd. Maybe he'd overreacted. Maybe this was just her blowing off steam. Then he showed up. The guy swaggered in like he owned the place. Tall, mid-20s, with a jawline that could cut glass and a grin that said he knew it. "Chris," one of Sarah's friends squealed, and suddenly he was in the mix, all charm and bravado. Sarah lit up like a Christmas tree. She tossed her hair, leaned in close to whisper something that made him laugh, and, oh, there it was. Her hand brushed his arm, lingering just a second too long. Dylan's soda turned sour in his mouth. He watched, rooted to the spot as they danced. Not the casual, friendly kind of dancing you might expect from a married woman out with friends. No, this was close. Hips brushing, her laughter tilting her head back, his hand resting low on her waist. The club lights pulsed red and blue, casting their little show in a haze of color, and Dylan felt the heat creeping up his neck. Then it happened. Chris leaned down and Sarah didn't pull away. Their lips met. The crowd swallowed them up, oblivious, but Dylan saw it all. His blood roared in his ears, a molten mix of rage and disbelief. She wasn't just flirting. She wasn't just lying. She was kissing some smug guy named Chris in the middle of a dance floor, while Dylan stood there like a fool with a flat soda and a fake business trip. Enough was enough. His hands curled into fists, trembling but resolute. He wasn't sure what he'd say. Hell, he wasn't even sure what he'd do, but he couldn't just watch anymore. The detective gig was over. It was time to step into the spotlight. They say when men betray, they slink around in the shadows, all hush-hush and sneaky. When women cheat, though, they do it bold as brass, right under the strobe lights for the world to see. Dylan had seen enough. His blood was a furnace, but his eyes were cold as he pushed through the crowd, the thumping bass no match for the storm brewing inside him. "Great party, huh?" he called out, loud enough to cut through the music like a knife through butter. Sarah flinched, her red lips parting in a silent gasp. Her friends froze mid-sip, their glitter-dusted faces swiveling toward him. Chris, still clueless, straightened up, sizing up the hooded figure who'd just crashed their little love fest. "Who are you?" he asked, brows knitting together in a cocky frown. "Husband," Dylan snapped, the word landing like a brick. Dead silence. Even the DJ seemed to miss a beat. The air around them thickened, charged with the kind of tension that could spark a fire, or a fistfight. "Husband?" Chris barked out a laugh, loud and brash, like he'd just heard the punchline of the year. "Well, that's a plot twist." Dylan crossed his arms, his voice steady but sharp enough to slice. "So, care to explain why you're pawing my wife?" Chris shrugged, all lazy confidence flashing that $1,000,000 grin. "Dude, chill out. Sarah and I go way back. We're like friends. Well, mostly." He winked, leaning into the mostly with a chuckle that practically begged for trouble. Sarah's eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. "Dylan, please, not here," she yelped, then whirled on Chris. "Shut up, Chris!" Too late. The words were gasoline, and Dylan was the match. 2 seconds, that's all it took. One moment Chris was smirking, the next he was sprawled on the sticky club floor, clutching his nose with a groan. It wasn't a knockout punch, Dylan wasn't built for that, but it was enough to send a message. The crowd gasped, a ripple of whispers spreading like wildfire. "Did you see that? Who is that guy? Who?" Security swooped in like vultures, beefy arms shoving through the chaos. "Break it up! Out! All of you!" A bouncer grabbed Dylan by the shoulder, another hauled Chris to his feet, and Sarah's friends scurried behind, clutching their purses like shields. The whole messy crew got frog-marched out the door, dumped unceremoniously onto the sidewalk as the neon sign flickered overhead. Outside, the night air hit like a slap. Chris dabbed at his nose, muttering something about crazy jealous types, while Sarah stood a few feet away, arms crossed, glaring at Dylan like he'd just ruined her Oscar-worthy performance. Her friends hovered awkwardly, whispering among themselves, probably wondering if this was the part where they should call an Uber and flee. Dylan brushed off his hoodie, his chest heaving, the adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. He'd wanted answers, and he'd gotten them, along with a bruised knuckle and a front-row seat to his marriage imploding. The question now was, what came next? The ride home was a silent war zone. Dylan gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, while Sarah stared out the passenger window, arms crossed, her dress now looking more like battle armor than party attire. The streetlights flickered over their faces, casting long shadows that matched the gulf between them. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The fight was already brewing, just waiting for 4 walls to contain it. Once they stepped inside, the dam broke. Sarah spun on him, her voice a whip crack in the quiet house. "You're sick, Dylan. Who does that? You're obsessed with controlling me." Dylan tossed his keys onto the counter with a clang, his calm fraying at the edges. "Controlling? No, Sarah, what's sick is lying to your husband and making out with random guys in clubs." She shrieked, a sound so sharp it could have shattered glass. "Men, husbands, who ban parties are dictators? You want me locked up like some 1950s housewife? And women who cheat are liars," he shot back, his tone flat but cutting. "Don't twist this around on me." Sarah flailed her arms, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "I just love to have fun, okay? That's all. Chris is a joke, a friend, nothing serious." Her words tumbled out fast, desperate, but they rang hollow. Dylan wasn't buying it. A friend. Sure, if friend meant a flirty club buddy she locked lips with while her husband slaved away on business trips, plotting his life around her promises. He could see it now. Chris was her escape hatch, her shiny distraction from the boring life she claimed he'd trapped her in. The argument stretched on, a ping-pong match of accusations and deflections. She called him old-fashioned, a killjoy, a relic. He called her reckless, dishonest, a walking betrayal. She stomped her foot. He rubbed his temples. The air crackled with everything they'd left unsaid for months, years maybe, until it wasn't even about Chris anymore. It was about them and the chasm they'd built brick by brick. Finally, Dylan had enough. "I'm done," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He turned, strode to the bedroom, and started pulling papers from the desk. Passports, bank statements, anything he might need. He grabbed a duffel bag, stuffed it with clothes, not even bothering to fold them. Sarah trailed after him, her voice rising in pitch. "What are you doing? You're overreacting." He didn't answer. He zipped the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked back to the living room. At the door he paused, his hand on the knob, and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that night. Her makeup was smudged, her hair a mess, but it was the defiance in her eyes that hit him hardest. "I can't be around you right now," he said, his voice low, thick with anger he didn't trust himself to unleash. "It's too much." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Sarah alone in the house that suddenly felt too big. She sank onto the couch, the silence pressing in around her. For once there was no music, no laughter, no escape, just the echo of his words and the sinking realization that this wasn't a bluff. Dylan was serious, deadly serious, and the word divorce loomed like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Dylan crashed at his colleague Mike's place, a cramped bachelor pad with a pull-out couch and a fridge full of questionable leftovers. It wasn't home, but it was a lifeline, a quiet spot to think, to plan his next move without Sarah's voice echoing in his ears. He'd barely unpacked his duffel when the universe decided to throw him another curveball. Chris, that swaggering guy with a bruised nose and an ego to match, wasn't done. Nursing his grudge like a cheap beer, he took to social media with a vengeance. Up went the post, a blurry club selfie of him and Sarah, her arm looped around his neck, captioned in big bold letters, "Dylan, the city's biggest cuckold." Subtlety wasn't Chris's strong suit. The post spread like wildfire, likes, shares, snarky comments piling up by the hour. Some folks cackled at Dylan's expense. "Guess he's not the only one working late." Others turned on Sarah. "What a train wreck. Poor guy deserves better." The city's gossip mill was in overdrive, and Dylan's name was the fuel. Sarah, meanwhile, was spiraling. She blew up Chris's phone, begging him to take it down. "Delete it, please. This is insane." But Chris, drunk on his own petty triumph, didn't care. He fired back with a jab of his own. "Oh, come on, princess. You loved the attention last night. And not just last night. Or maybe you're ashamed that you cheated on your husband." His ego was a runaway train, spoiled, smug, and itching to make everyone else as miserable as his swollen nose. Sarah's pleas bounced off him like rain on a windshield. Desperate, she did the one thing she hadn't tried yet. She called Dylan. He picked up on the third ring, his voice flat, guarded. "What?" "Dylan, I'm so sorry," she blurted, her words tumbling over each other. "I was wrong about everything. Can we just try again? Please?" "No," he said, simple and final, like a door slamming shut. "But you still love me," she pressed, her tone pleading, almost frantic. "I know you do." He paused, just long enough for her to hope, then hit her with the counterpunch. "And did you ever respect me?" Silence stretched across the line. She fumbled for an answer, her voice small when it finally came. "I did. I tried. I was stupid, okay? I messed up." Dylan let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Stupid doesn't cover it, Sarah. You hooked up with a walking disaster like Chris, some brain-dead pretty boy who's now got the whole city laughing at me. And you think sorry fixes that?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of it landed anyway. "You burned through my trust. I'm not sticking around to be the husband everyone's calling a fool online. I always told you your partying would get you in trouble. Deal with the mess you made." "Dylan, I'm sorry," she started, but the line went dead. He'd hung up, leaving her words dangling in the void. Sarah sat there, phone limp in her hand, the glow of the screen casting her face in harsh light. Outside, the internet churned on, memes and hot takes multiplying by the minute. Dylan, sprawled on Mike's lumpy couch, stared at the ceiling, the faint buzz of his phone notifications a cruel soundtrack to the wreckage of his marriage. He didn't check them. He didn't need to. The scandal was out there now, a beast he couldn't tame. Dylan wasn't one to wallow. First things first, he met with a divorce lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp suit and sharper questions. Papers were drawn up, the wheel set in motion, but that wasn't enough. Chris, that smarmy little weasel, had crossed a line, and Dylan wasn't about to let him strut away unscathed. The guy had guts, sure, plastering his nonsense all over the internet, but guts without brains just made you a target. So Dylan got to work. He hired a guy, a wiry, quiet type named Eddie who had a knack for digging up dirt. "Find me everything on Chris," Dylan said, sliding an envelope of cash across the table. Eddie nodded, no questions asked, and vanished into the ether like a budget Batman. It didn't take long. A week later, Eddie slid a folder across the same table. "Your boy's a real piece of work," he said with a smirk. Turns out, Chris was a trust fund kid living large on his parents' dime, spinning tales of a startup that existed only in his head. The truth? He blew their money on bottle service, designer sneakers, and enough club nights to keep the city's bartenders in business. His folks, bless their naive hearts, thought their golden boy was the next big thing, Steve Jobs with better hair. Dylan saw his opening. He tracked down Chris's father, a stern, silver-haired man named Richard, at a grocery store parking lot. Pure coincidence, of course. Dylan had Eddie tip him off. He approached, casual but calculated, catching Richard loading bags into his SUV. "Mr. Hargrove?" Dylan said, voice steady. "I'm Dylan. You don't know me, but I know your son." Richard squinted, sizing him up. "What's this about?" Dylan laid it out, calmly, no dramatics. The clubs, the lies, the money, the internet stunt calling him a cuckold. He handed over a few choice photos Eddie had snagged. Chris stumbling out of Pulse at 4 a.m., cash fanned out like a rapper in a music video. "He's not who you think he is," Dylan finished. "And I'd appreciate it if he took down that garbage he posted. Publicly, with an apology. Otherwise, this could get messier, for him." Richard's face darkened, jaw tight. He wasn't a man who tolerated nonsense, gossip, scams, or spoiled brats dragging his name through the mud. "I'll handle it," he growled, slamming the tailgate shut. "You have my word." 2 days later, Chris's world crumbled. Daddy cut the cord. No more allowance, no more startup fairy tales. The flashy Instagram post vanished, replaced by a single shaky video. Chris sat there, pale and sulky, looking like a kid caught stealing cookies. So everything I posted before was just a joke," he mumbled, eyes darting off camera, probably to where Richard loomed. "Dylan and Sarah had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry." He sounded about as sincere as a used car salesman, but it was enough. Word got around fast. Chris's fall from grace was spectacular. Turns out, Richard wasn't messing around. A couple of months later, the rumor mill churned out gold. Chris had been shipped off to the army. Basic training, buzz cut, the whole deal. Drill sergeants were about to take that ego of his and stomp it into the dirt. Dylan couldn't help but smile at the thought. Justice, served with a side of push-ups. Meanwhile, the divorce marched on. Sarah fought it tooth and nail, calling him late at night, her voice teary and pleading. "We can fix this, Dylan. I'll change. I swear." But he'd heard that song before, and he wasn't buying the remix. The papers were signed, the ink dry. She was left alone, the taste of regret bitter on her tongue, staring at the wreckage of her choices. And Dylan? He felt the weight lift. It wasn't just about winning. It was about closing a chapter that had dragged him through the mud. He walked away, head high, a quiet victor ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.